So let's kick off 2026 by talking about Dallas Cowboys wide receiver George Pickens and specifically the easy decision that he has to make, and may I add, that he has to make now. I wanted to start off with our live streams for the year by speaking on George Pickens for a simple reason. I think he is the best thing that he happened to the Cowboys in 2025. If we are recapping the year that just ended, and you ask me, what was your favorite part about the 2025 Cowboys season? We all understand there's nothing to talk about on the defensive side of the ball. We might be able to talk about Dak Prescott and the way that he played, but if you ask me what was the most fun, it absolutely was the way that George Pickens played football. Because it wasn't just that he ended up being a top tier weapon. It's how fun it was to watch him, right? How fun it was to watch him make spectacular catches down the sideline, going up in the air and beating two defenders at once. You remember that Philadelphia Eagles play? It was not only the amount of touchdowns that he was scoring or how he stepped up in the absence of CeeDee Lamb for a portion of the season, it was how he was gaining yards after the catch, how he was dominating with this land route, how he was doing, hitting the triangle button against defenders and leaping over them consistently throughout the year. So we had to talk about George Pickens, right? We had to talk about George Pickens for that exact reason. And unfortunately, though, with the season all but over, with the Cowboys eliminated from the playoffs, we got to talk about Pickens in the context of the pending contract negotiations that he's about to have with the Cowboys. Because with one game separating us from the offseason, that's going to be the conversation for months now. But I wanted to, take away maybe from the negativity that usually accompanies contract negotiations, and I wanted to touch on the one decision that I think the Cowboys, that George Pickens, needs to make before entering these negotiations. And to do so, I do need to talk a little bit about something that Stephen Jones said last year, so a while back. And I'm not making a 2026 joke, but I'm talking about August of 2025, so a while back, actually. Before I get into the decision that George Pickens needs to make, let me just say hi. Shout out to Hood Kush over here on YouTube. Happy New Year to you as well, brother. Joey Bella as well, saying hi in the chat. Appreciate you. And we've got Joey, who is watching us from Italy. Shout out to Joey, man. Thank you for being here. Side note, I am pretty obsessed with a video game right now that is supposed to take place in a post-apocalyptic Italy. Shout out to Joe, man. Thank you for joining the show. Shout out to Carlo as well in the comments over on TikTok. Appreciate you guys joining on the TikTok side of things. If you see me turning to my right, that's because I've got the TikTok stream going on the Facebook. And shout out as well to the people joining us over at Instagram. Appreciate you for joining the show. Sorry. Now, why am I talking about Pickens' contract? Jerry Jones went on 105.3 The Fan this week. And for those of you who missed it somehow, some way, the drama with Micah Parsons last year was all about Jerry wanted to speak to Micah directly because he had a meeting with him in March, and he alleges that they had struck a deal, a handshake deal. Micah Parsons sustained that that wasn't an actual agreement, that was just a conversation, a meeting of the minds, but that he instructed the Cowboys to go through his agent, David Mulligetta, which whatever opinion you have on the Micah Parsons trade, you got to admit that is only fair, right? If the player is being like, hey, go through my agent, that's a fair stance to take. But Micah did make one mistake. Micah did make the mistake of agreeing to the meeting in the first place. Now, the story goes that it was supposed to be a meeting about leadership and Micah's leadership role within the team ahead of the negotiations. Maybe that's true, maybe that isn't true. We really don't know. Each side has its story. But he did make that mistake. Maybe he Troy, I get it. I get it, man, but don't get mad at me. This will all make sense. He says, why are you bringing up Parsons? He's gone. Move on. This is not about the whole drama that's going on this week. I promise. This is about George Pickens. And if you think the Micah Parsons negotiations don't have anything to do with the George Pickens negotiation, I'm about to explain why we're speaking on this. I understand where you're coming from, but give me some leeway here, and I'll get there. The context is very important. I do think that was a mistake from Micah. And I think the decision that George Pickens needs to make is take Stephen Jones by his word and avoid such a meeting. And what I mean by that is that after the Micah Parsons trade, Stephen Jones said this: we do have players that come in. This was in the post-trade press conference. We do have players that come in, and we totally respect it, that say, I don't feel comfortable talking about my contract, and I would like to go through my agent. And we do that respectfully. You are not required to come in and negotiate the contract yourself. Now, George Pickens has to stay away from the negotiating table. George Pickens has to politely decline a meeting with Jerry Jones at some point this offseason if he gets invited to one. George Pickens has to tell Jerry, listen, man, go through my agent. Because already Jerry Jones is kind of like kickstarting the George Pickens drama by saying, yeah, I don't know if I'll talk to David Mulligetta when negotiating the George Pickens contract. You know, that is just Jerry being Jerry. I understand it because he's going to get us talking about it. But it is such a silly stance to take, such an unserious stance to take, that you went through all the Micah Parsons drama largely because you couldn't communicate with David Mulligetta, and they never communicated until the very end when it all fell apart. You didn't communicate with him at all. And now, ahead of negotiations that you really want to get right, because George Pickens is a freaking good ball player, and he has not failed you in the behavior department because he has been excellent there. Sure, minus a little problem there that arose when they were in Las Vegas that resulted in Pickens getting benched for the first drive of the game along with CeeDee Lamb. But there wasn't any locker room drama. George Pickens was seen as one of the best teammates on the Cowboys this year. You should be trying actively to avoid any of that contract drama that arose from the Parsons negotiations. And Jerry does not seem intent on doing that, right? Jerry is like, maybe I'll talk to David Mulligetta. But Jerry even added, but I do expect to be talking to George. Now, that's somewhat of a contradiction to what Stephen said, right? Because Stephen said last year, and again, I would be holding on to this quote if I was George Pickens. Stephen said, you are not required to come in and negotiate the contract yourself. Stephen said, sure, if you don't want to do it, don't do it, right? If you do, we'll welcome you in, we'll pour you a cup of coffee, and we will use strong negotiation tactics that we've learned over the years, and that obviously we are at an advantage versus a 25-year-old player, because that's important too, man. Like, if you think that the Cowboys are being honest about how they want to do business this way because it's a family kind business and, you know, we all get along very well here and we run this as a family, blah, blah, blah. None of that is true. None of that is true. But Jerry knows that in David Mulligetta, he has a strong contender in negotiations. He knows that versus a 25-year-old player who has no real experience negotiating, who has no real experience working through a $1 million contract or a $30 million per year contract or whatever it turns out to be, he knows they're at a disadvantage because Jerry can come in and pitch his pitch and say whatever he wants to say, basically, and talk about there's not enough pie for everyone and we have to respect the salary cap. Whereas with Mulligetta, he has someone that understands very well what the salary cap looks like. He understands very well the leverage that his player has. He understands very well the industry numbers, so on and so forth. So This is all to say, man, ahead of these contract negotiations between the Cowboys and Pickens, man, Pickens has to stay away from the negotiating table. And even if he does, it doesn't mean it's going to be pretty. It wasn't pretty for Dak. It wasn't pretty for CD. And both of them took a less active approach in the contract negotiations compared to what Micah did. And I think that's the easy decision that George has to make, man. Just stay away from any meeting that Jerry Jones tries to schedule for you, because nothing good will come out of it. That's the big takeaway. Now, let's read some of your comments. I want to know what you think about this. Let me know if you agree or disagree with everything that is being said right now. But first, shout out to Shaquille, who says, Happy New Year, my boy. Hey, Happy New Year to you as well, sir. Shout out to Landon here, who says, what do you think the odds are re-signing George Pickens? I'm going to be honest with you. I think a long-term extension is unlikely. Maybe they get it done. And I'll tell you the silver lining for hope that you might have if you want a long-term deal done. But I think the likeliest scenario is the franchise tag. The franchise tag currently is below what George Pickens would get in average per year on a long-term deal. Because the franchise tag is going to be around $28 million. A long-term deal, I would expect to be in the $30 million range. So, it's obviously less expensive, quote unquote. The problem with the franchise tag is twofold. Number one, that $28 million number is not adjustable in the salary cap because it's guaranteed salary. So every single one of those dollars George Pickens is going to get in 2025, and there's nothing you can do to hit the salary cap throughout the years or whatever. There's nothing you can do like that. It's tough on the salary cap to use the franchise tag. The second problem, and the most realistic one and the most concerning one, is if you franchise tag George Pickens, you better know this. Pickens is not going to show up to the offseason. He's not going to show up for training camp. He's not going to show up for the preseason. So you are going to have to hope that Pickens and Dak can figure things out in September. And we already saw what that can do to a quarterback and a wide receiver relationship. In 2024, CD and Dak were not on the same page for a while. It took them a long time to get on the same page and have the chemistry that they had in 2023 when they were destroying every defense that faced them. If you franchise tag George Pickens, the guy is not going to be there in the offseason. And that is not to knock George Pickens. That's the way the NFL works. Every star player that gets franchise tagged, that is looking for a long-term deal, will hold out because that's their biggest leverage, honestly. So that is obviously a problem. Long-term deal, man, there might be a chance. I would put it at around 40%, because I do think Pickens plays for Dallas in 2026, whether it's on the tag or whether it's through a long-term deal. But the reason why I would say 40%, and the reason why I would say this could happen, a George Pickens extension could happen, is this. Jerry Jones is 83 years old, and Jerry Jones knows that the project the Cowboys are working with is somewhat of a 3-year project, right? It's a project that the window to win is set for like the next 3 years. I'm not saying that the Cowboys are one move away, because they're not. The Cowboys need to rebuild the entire defense. They need to find an offensive tackle. They need to do a lot of things. But Dak is signed through the next 3 years. CeeDee Lamb is on the same time frame. The same goes for a lot of the players that the Cowboys have signed, and even Brian Schottenheimer. Schottenheimer signed a 4-year deal. So it seems to me that if you look at the 3-year window, you look at Jerry Jones being 83 years old, you look at all the factors, this 3-year window, man, with the way that Dak Prescott is playing, it kind of seems like Jerry's last shot at a Super Bowl. Not talking about, life or death here necessarily, but I'm talking about, and Jerry talks about this too, he knows that time is a factor for him. And if that is the case, what is the shortest path to the Cowboys winning? Is it building out a defense that you may have some foundations there, but you don't have star players? I mean, it's Quinnen Williams, of course. Quinnen is a star player. He is great. But you're missing so much on defense. And by Monday, you're probably going to be missing a defense coordinator as well. Because the Cowboys are likely going to move on from Matt Eberflus, I would say. Is that the shortest path to winning in the playoffs? Like building out a defense and having a balanced roster and using the pie to go around with like players, across all positions? Or is it through betting on an elite offense? And if the Cowboys can keep George Pickens for the next 2 to 3 years, then that likely means they're going to have an elite offense in the next 2 to 3 years. Because the way that Dak, CD, and Pickens were putting in work this season, that was elite production at times. It was inconsistent because the Cowboys need to figure out their offensive line and they need to figure out play calling in certain situations and all that. But you have the talent to field an elite offense. And if Jerry sees it that way, I hope he can strike that long-term deal. I think that's the biggest reason why the Cowboys would strike a long-term deal with George Pickens. But dude, I'm not sure they're gonna, because he's gonna be expensive. So I would say 40% Landon, to answer your question. And that was a long answer. I'm sorry about that. Shout out to John Jones. He says, Happy New Year's, Mo. Shout out, John. Happy New Year to you as well. Toad here says, I think Jerry should tag and trade Pickens, and Flournoy is ready to be a number 2 wide receiver. I think they need to talk about it. I think they need to at least consider that possibility. But I will also pour a bucket of ice water in the Flournoy part. Can Flournoy be a number 2 wide receiver? Sure. I think he's played great. I think he is exciting. His future is exciting. He could start. He could be a number 2 wide receiver for your offense. But let's get real. Flournoy is unlikely to be anything close to what George Pickens is. We should get real. George Pickens is an all-pro candidate this year. We have not seen Flournoy start for a full season even. So, I mean, worst case scenario, can you have Flournoy as a number 2 wide receiver? Sure. Is it a massive downgrade? Obviously it is. George Pickens was one of the best wide receivers in the NFL this season. So I'm not disagreeing with what Toad's saying regarding Flournoy. Maybe he's ready to be a number 2 wide receiver. But with Pickens, you're talking about a monster wide receiver. And we have not seen enough from Flournoy to think that he can be that down the road. But it would be a massive downgrade. So I don't think Flournoy is the reason why you trade away George Pickens. That is my point here. If you trade George Pickens, it's not because Flournoy can go. It's because you don't want to pay up. And you think it's not worth it to keep him for 2026, and you can get a first rounder and maybe go that route. But it's not because of Flournoy. No way, in my opinion. Merck says, I want us to trade Pickens if at all possible. Sign and tag and trade for a second or a couple thirds. I would like a first. Man, I mean, again, I think they got to talk about it. Like, and the reasoning has to be, if I'm not going to keep Pickens beyond 2026, if I'm only going to tag him and play him 1 year, what can I get in return? That has to be the conversation if you do want to trade him. But honestly, I would take the 2026 season, even if it's just that one season. I would take Pickens 1 more year. I am guilty of that. I started this show by saying I would that I thought that Pickens was the best thing that happened to Dallas in 2025. I stand by it. Give me Pickens even if it's for 1 more year. Okay? Hey, what's up, Lorinova85? Appreciate seeing you again in the comments there, man. Shout out to you, sir. Let's see here. Ostyler says, Flournoy ain't ready to be a number 2. Sign Pickens. What are we talking about? Yeah, I do agree with Osweiler there. Like, I wouldn't base my Pickens decision on that at all. And Toad followed that up by saying, I agree Pickens to Florida is a big downgrade, but we can't put most of the cap on offense and then blame the defense for being bad. Oh, man, team building is always so controversial, because I think points of view like that is valid, but I also think you can get away with it. And I also think these teams that are contenders, they usually have an elite side of the ball and a decent side of the ball. And I think that's what the Cowboys can aim for here. Like, if you extend George Pickens, then you would have an elite offense. You could have an elite offense, and you can just round out the defense and expect it to be average, not even great, right? Travis over at TikTok, he says, I agree. Let's keep Pickens at least one more year. Dude, yeah, man. Yeah. George says, if you need to choose either to keep George Pickens or get a competent elite defense, what would be the best decision? Competent and elite, very different things. So I think if you tell me the Cowboys are going to have an elite defense in 2026, sure. I mean, give me the elite defense, I guess. But again, man, if we're talking objectively, if we're talking realistically, with the constraints of having a new defensive coordinator, having 1 year to rebuild the defense, I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. You're not going to have an elite defense in 2026. I mean, it's not one or the other. I'm not saying that if you pay Pickens, it doesn't hurt what else you're going to bring in across the roster, but the defense is not going to be elite. That's not the choice. It might be 1 or 2 starters that you're not going to have, right? But even then, like, do we expect the Cowboys to go and get, like, multiple starting defenders in free agency that are here to make an immediate impact? Because I think they're not going to do that. And I cannot expect a first-round rookie, even if he is a first-round rookie, to come in and change the face of the defense either. So it's tough, man. It is tough. I would absolutely prioritize Pickens over the defense, honestly. Because I think you can have an elite offense. And then on defense, I can aim for decent. I can aim for average. And I think you can win a lot of ball games like that. The Cowboys might win 8 games with the worst defense in football, and largely because of the way that the offense played. And that was despite poor pass protection, where the Cowboys absolutely have to get better, by the way. With all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I'll get out of here. I'll let you go on about your Friday. I hope that you guys have a fantastic 2026. I hope that the Cowboys also have a fantastic 2026. And I'll tell you this, before I get out of here, I'll tell you this. If they are going to have a good 2026, it's going to be because of what they do in March. I love the draft. I know that you guys love the draft. We've got amazing draft content creators in the Cowboys community. But dude, if you're going to be good in 2026, it's because of what they do in free agency, not the draft. Not the draft. The Cowboys are not going to rebuild the defense in the NFL draft. They might get a couple of very good additions in the first round, right? Because they got 2 first-rounders. But I want to see what they do in March. And then based on that, I'll tell you if I'm buying in or not into the 2026 Cowboys. But they got to show us that they're willing to go spend, etc. So we'll see, man. We will see. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll get out of here. Have a happy new year, man. And I hope that you guys have a fantastic 2026. I'll see you next week, Friday at noon. See you. Bye-bye.